Ashley Benefield, a former model and ballerina, finding herself at the center of a high-profile trial after being accused of shooting and killing her husband, Douglas Benefield. Claiming self-defense, Ashley's case sheds light on the complexities of domestic violence and the legal challenges that arise when trying to prove justifiable force. All this weekend on the Hidden Killers podcast, we're examining the case of Ashley Benefield, examining the events leading up to that fateful day in their Lakewood Ranch, Florida home, and the allegations of abuse Ashley made against Douglas. We're taking you to the courtroom for raw audio from the Stand Your Ground hearing of Ashley Benefield all weekend here on the Hidden Killers podcast.
So from this point on, at least from your perspective as the family lawyer, was there sort of a peace between the two?
Well, there was. In fact, they had an agreement that we memorialized into a joint stipulation to expand the time sharing that Judge Moreland had ordered. So within a handful of days after seeing his daughter for the first time, Ashley and Doug had a written agreement signed by both attorneys and submitted to the court that said you get to see the child even more, exchanging the child anywhere they agreed. If there was no agreement, the exchange default would be at the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, but more frequently, not supervised by her. And that then was the norm for quite a while.
And how long did that last, approximately?
About 11 months, I would say. From September of 2018 until August of 2019, they were together all the time. Doug's time sharing was always with Ashley present, so they were certainly behaving as a family. They were quite active on the social scene.
I was going to say, did you ever see them?
I did. They were in magazines. I think they were even in SRQ magazine at some kind of ballet gala event together.
So at some point, this peace did not last.
Yes, it did not last.
About when did things start to go downhill?
Unbeknownst to Doug, they were about to go downhill in August of 2019. He was scheduled to move in with Miss Benefield and her mother. So he'd kept an apartment or a little condo here in the Sarasota area, but his lease was running out. So they had agreed that he was going to move into their home. They moved all of his things inside to their home, emptied the storage unit of his contents into Miss Benefield's home. And the day he was scheduled to move in, as he always said, she ghosted me. She didn't answer the phone. And so I think it was August 16th of 2019 was the date that he was supposed to move in, and then suddenly everything changed.
Okay. So
just for the record, you want a continuing objection to hearsay and relevancy.
Yeah, we're getting pretty in depth with this whole situation.
okay, and I can move along.
Okay.
So at some point, did Ashley start filing complaints
Yes.
against Doug?
Yes. She started again. Yes.
Okay. And how many complaints were there, if you recall?
I would say a half dozen. They started, I think, in December of that year, and then they just kept on going for another 4 or 5 months. And there were complaints about the child.
Okay.
They were
So
not about her.
not about her, complaints of abuse of the child.
Correct.
Okay. And at some point, did Ashley file for another injunction?
Yes.
And were you involved in that process?
Yes.
I'm sorry, as a part of that investigation concerning those complaints and that request for an injunction, was a psychological evaluation ordered?
It was not ordered by the family court, but there was a psychological evaluation that was put into place through CPS, and I believe it was Detective Moreland.
Okay. So at some point, a psychological evaluation of both Doug and Ashley was ordered?
Yes.
All right. And to your knowledge, Doug participated in that?
Oh, yes.
Who was that doctor?
Dr. Brad Broder.
At some point around this time, did Doug file for divorce?
He did. In November of 2019, we filed a motion for leave to amend and then a amended petition for dissolution of marriage.
Was that your case number? Did it run along with her injunction case number as we talked about before?
Yes, they were companion cases.
Companion cases?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. When was it set for a hearing?
Again, it was a hearing that was set and then moved a couple times. So I think it was originally set for hearing in May of 2020, moved to August, and then moved to September of 2020.
Do you recall the date in September?
It was scheduled for September 30th,
Okay.
2020.
Were you ordered to mediation first?
Yes. At Ms. Benefield's request, she filed a motion for mediation. The court entered an order of referral to mediation.
Okay. And during the mediation, were you present at the mediation?
Yes, we were all present via Zoom, but not in person because it during COVID.
Okay. But the defendant was there via Zoom?
Yes.
And Doug was there via Zoom?
Yes.
And the mediator?
Yes. As well as Ms. Benefield's attorney was also present.
And who was that?
Faith Brown. At the time, she had been let go from her prior attorney.
Okay. So what did Ashley say at the mediation about their relationship?
Both of them said,
Sustained.
What did Ashley say? It's the defendant.
This is during a mediation? Is there some exception? Mediations are generally private and confidential.
I can move on. I thought it was a hearsay. You're saying something else.
No, I'm assuming, you tell me what your objection is.
Objection, it's.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, unless you have some case law that there's an exception to the general, I'm going to say secrecy, but the privilege, the mediation privilege, I'm not aware of any case law, but you may have some that there's an exception in a criminal prosecution.
I do not, Judge. I'll move on.
All right.
At some point after the mediation, did Ashley agree to drop the injunction?
oh, she'd agreed to drop the injunction before the mediation, but it wasn't just that she was going to drop it. It was a quid pro quo situation.
And what was the quid pro quo?
That he dismissed his divorce case and again, another emergency motion for time sharing for the parenting plan, and the joint motion to release the psychological evaluations conducted by Dr. Brad Broder.
Okay. And in fact, were those things all dismissed except for the psychological evaluation release?
They were not.
Okay. The hearing that was set for 9:30, what was to happen at that hearing?
There had been a lot of discussion leading up to that, and the plan was that the September 30th hearing would not be held on the injunction because the agreement was that once the psychological evaluations were provided, then the injunction would be dismissed and the family law case would be dismissed.
Okay.
So the 30th hearing was supposed to be the joint motion for release of psychological evaluations.
Okay. And what day was Doug murdered?
So that he was murdered on Sunday, September 27th, 2020.
3 days before this hearing was scheduled.
3 days after the mediation, 3 days before the court date.
And who was the judge scheduled to be at this hearing on the 30th?
Chief Judge Diana Moreland,
So the same judge that had heard the rest.
same judge.
In all of the times that you dealt with Doug, did he ever have what I would term like an overly angry demeanor towards Ashley in your presence?
No,
Okay.
which was kind of a source of conflict with Doug and I, actually. He was very passive, very accepting, and always looking for excuses or reasons, not angry. Just surprising. He was also very suspicious of her, but never angry.
Okay. And did he always blame her for everything, or?
No, not at all. I think he often blamed Dr. Hildegard Staninger, who was related to the Charleston labs, who obtained, involved with the poisoning allegations and the lab results. But no, not always Ashley. He was always trying to look for, some explanation as to her conduct.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Thank you.
All right, Cross.
Good morning, Ms. Murphy.
Good morning, Mr. Taylor.
You practice family law,
I do.
and you've been doing it, I think you told us, approximately 15 and a half years you've had your own firm?
I've been practicing family law for approximately 21 years, but I've had my own firm for about 15 and a half years.
Okay. And in the course of your practice, have you had the opportunity to represent both petitioners and respondents in domestic violence injunction actions?
I have.
And have you represented them, Ms. Murphy, strictly in family court, or have you also continued in representation in those cases where the disputes end up in criminal court as well?
Only in family court. I do not practice criminal law.
Okay, so on those occasions you would refer it out.
Yes.
All right. It's the nature, is it not, in family court matters that the litigation is often, shall I say, spirited?
It can certainly be the case.
Okay. It's not unusual.
It's not unusual.
All right. Would it be fair to say that the litigation can sometimes, depending upon the parties, be quite aggressive?
Never to this level in all of my 21 years, but it can be aggressive.
All right.
This was extreme.
And it can also be determined, can it not?
I'm afraid I don't understand that question.
Litigation, in general, in family court matters.
Determined meaning?
Determined meaning neither side lets up. You have two people who fundamentally develop a real dislike for one another, and they just pour their heart and souls into the litigation.
Yes, unfortunately that happens.
Yeah. They shoot more family lawyers than they do criminal
I've heard that. I think there's more violence on the family law floor than on the criminal floor.
The litigation can often be petty as well, can it not?
Sometimes.
Yeah, where you get two parties that are arguing over a pet turtle, for example.
Right. This was the opposite of petty, but yes, it certainly can be.
All right, and you are, of course, like all of us, an advocate.
Yes.
And in this case, you were an advocate for Doug Benefield.
Yes.
And he paid you, did he not, to be his advocate?
He did.
During the hearing that we heard, the ruling for which I think it's a safe bet that the petitioner did not prevail, but would you agree with me that Judge Moreland did recognize that your client, Mr. Benefield, had fired a gun in the home when Miss Benefield was present? Yes,
she said that in her ruling.
And she also recognized that he had apparently punched holes in the drywall.
She did say that.
And in fairness, I believe Miss Murphy, she dismissed the firing the gun in the ceiling of the kitchen as too remote in time.
I believe that's what she said, yes.
And as to the punching of holes in the wall, I think she said it was not directed at Miss Benefield, but just out of frustration.
I don't remember that she said that. She certainly could have.
Okay. Having just recently heard it. So in cases of domestic violence injunctions, would you say what percentage of your clients are females and males that seek domestic violence injunction protections?
Well, I can't tell you if it would be my clients. I think in the cases in which I'm involved, the majority is the female client is seeking an injunction against the male.
Okay.
That's not necessarily indicative that the female is always a victim of domestic violence, because men can also be victims of domestic violence.
Yes. Now, through your 21 years worth of experience in family court, I'm sure you've come to learn that there are some stereotypical factors that seem to be rather common with a lot of abusers. Would you agree?
I do not necessarily agree with that, no. There are different types of abusers.
All right. Would you say that it's reasonably common in those instances where you've represented females seeking domestic violence injunctions against males, that the males are often controlling?
That is sometimes the prevailing foundation for why the domestic violence occurs, but not always.
Is that a yes?
No, it's a no, not really.
It's a no, not really, as opposed to sometimes?
Sometimes.
Okay. I'll take sometimes.
Okay.
All right. Have you had experience in those instances where you've represented females seeking protection from domestic violence, that the males are sometimes jealous and very possessive?
Judge, I'm going to object to this line of questioning as irrelevant.
I think it may be. I don't know. The witness can certainly say yes or no, or agree or disagree.
Okay.
That is one of the most rare reasons for the domestic violence in the cases that I've had in which I've represented the women. So jealousy is usually not a factor or a major factor.
So you've seen it?
I've seen it, yes, but not often.
That was my question. Have you experienced, in representing some of these females seeking protection for domestic violence against males, that they have employed a strategy, which obviously has not been successful, of appeasement over the course of time, and finally it builds to a sufficient crescendo that they end up as a client of yours?
I have seen that.
Okay. And by appeasement, we mean, do we not getting along, going along for fear that the reprisal will be greater?
Yes, that is true for both the female victim, if you want to use that word, as well as the male victim.
Mm-hmm. When you bring a petition for protection against domestic violence in the family court, are you foreclosed from returning and seeking a second petition?
Do you mean if a petition is denied, can you then file a different petition on the same allegations?
Not on the same allegations.
Okay, then, no, you're not foreclosed. You can file as many domestic violence injunctions as you like.
Correct.
No, regardless of how many times they've been denied.
Correct. So in other words, you've had a domestic violence petition denied, and then 2 months later, additional acts occur. You are entitled to go back to family court and file another domestic violence petition.
Of course.
And in fact, have you done that on behalf of clients in the past?
I just want to clarify, I don't file petitions for injunction, so a party would file that on their own at the clerk's office. So my involvement is usually after an injunction has been filed. That is when my involvement begins.
And have you represented people who have gone to court multiple times? Or do you only go one time?
Oh, no, I could go multiple times. I just don't think that I've ever had a situation where I've represented the petitioner who has made multiple injunction petition filings. I've represented several respondents who have been themselves then the victim of spurious litigation and abuse of the injunction process by repeatedly filing injunctions.
When Mr. Benefield was living here in Manatee County, he had his own apartment. Is that correct?
He wasn't not living here full time, but yes, he had an apartment at times during this period of time.
You're not aware of any point in time where he resided with Miss Benefield in the home where the shooting took place?
My understanding is that he did not.
I don't believe I have anything further. Give me a moment, Your Honor. That's all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Redirect?
No.
Can this witness be released?
Yes.
There is more to come in the Ashley Benefield Stand Your Ground hearing. We're bringing it to you all weekend long here on the Hidden Killers podcast. Press subscribe so you don't miss a minute of courtroom coverage. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.